I still believe that you cannot understand contemporary capitalism without Marx. In many ways, it's irreplaceable. We still live in the system that he has described so powerfully. And being able to anticipate the developments that are taking place today. That's why I say, yes, let's celebrate Marx and let's celebrate capital, but also realize that we need to see what is not taken into account. I think I began to read Marx when I was probably 18, 16, 17, in school. I had a teacher, I grew up in a communist town, and my teacher, Italian teacher, he was a Marxist. But then I began to study more systematically when I went to the United States. And then really, really more seriously with the feminist movement. Feminism was a whole beginning of seriously engaging with Marx. Yeah, interesting enough. And I always say, we learned a lot from Marx. Marx gave us the tool to criticize him. Because when we read the description of the reproduction of the workforce, he wrote for us. He literally wrote, but we had to change the subject. We had to bring in new subjects. It's only actually in Capital Volume 1 that Marx deals with the question of women's and labor. And I think he wrote some of the most powerful pages on the way the exploitation of women and children. I think that in the whole Marxist socialist revolutionary tradition, few have with so much pungency, analyzed the way capitalism exploits labor, and particularly the labor of women. At the same time, one of the limits of Marx is that he concentrates on the position of women, either in the bourgeois family or in terms of their work experience. He concentrates on their place in wage work, in wage industrial work. The criticism is that it does not see, the work of women in the process of reproduction as important in capitalist accumulation. That when it comes to an analysis of capitalist exploitation, right, it has a limited view of the ways in which capitalism exploits women, exploits women's labor. He does not see that the exploitation of women in capitalism, in the history of capitalism, even in the period of the Industrial Revolution, was not limited to waged industrial work, but actually, took place on a much broader arena, extending and to the whole sphere of domestic activity, those domestic activities that are crucial for the reproduction of the workforce. Marx very acutely, he recognizes the labor power, the potential that we have to work with potential for exploitation is not something that is naturally given. And particularly, in the work process, is constantly consumed on a day-to-day basis. And so it has to be reproduced. And recognizes that, but sees that process of the reproduction of the workforce as being accomplished completely through commodity production. In other words, the worker gets the wage, and out of the wage buys the commodities that are needed, the food, the houses, etc., and that's how they reproduce themselves. There's no other kind of work that comes in. For example, to prepare the food, right? For example, to make love. For example, to raise the children, etc. There's no sex. It's a totally asexual worker that Marx has in mind. He speaks of procreation, and he says, well, the capitalist class can let the workers take care of that. But no, actually the state intervenes very heavily with all kinds of prohibition, regulation, and this is the criticism that we have. This criticism of Marx's omission of the sphere of reproduction extends to his analysis of primitive accumulation, where the focus of the analysis is on the expulsion of the peasantry from the land, right? The enclosure, the fencing off of the commons, and so forth. And again, I think that analysis, and the formation of a wage working class. I think, again, that analysis was very limited because, as I've tried to demonstrate in Caliban and the Witch, clearly other forms, other types of enclosures were necessary. And so I've spoken about the body, the mechanization of the body, and all the practices that were introduced in the 16th, 17th century, to produce a body machines. Capitalism produced. The more important, the steam engine, was the mechanization of the body. Yes, it was. And that study and that attempt to turn all body powers into labor powers is something that has never ended. I think that particularly starting in the 19th century, the question of disciplining the future generation of workers and preparing girls and boys to that kind of mechanization, lowering expectation. The work of lowering expectation, that's very fundamental, right? You cannot do this, you cannot do that because, look, when you're going to have a job, you cannot always do what you desire, etc. That preparation, it's really part of housework. Imagine if the capitalist class had to use, part of the wealth that they accumulate to build an infrastructure, a reproductive infrastructure, replacing all the many tasks the women accomplish in the home. Their level of accumulation would have been drastically reduced. Capitalism needs to always have a population at the bottom, because the work of reproducing labor, the work of reproducing labor power, it's a key determinant in the value of that labor power, a key determinant of the process of accumulation of value, of creation of surplus value. And that means always the need to create, a population, whether it is unpaid domestic workers, whether it is paid domestic worker coming, from the most impoverished parts of the world, and therefore working in conditions often of coercion, as we have today with immigrant women, often working in conditions that are very, very coercive. Or it is people in the plantation. We should not forget that much of the reproductive work that went into the production of industrial proletariat, and into this day, is work that was done by slave labor. So racism and sexism are necessary conditions of existence of the capitalist class. When you see the kind of mechanism of exploitation that I've articulated before, how the capitalist class always need a population without rights in the colonies, in the kitchen, in the plantation, which in fact is determinant of the process of value accumulation. When you see that, you realize that racism, sexism are conditions of existence, are not degenerations, but are actually intrinsic elements of the capitalist system of exploitation. And in that way, you know, they represent one of our most important terrain of struggle. I am Silvia Federici. I am a teacher, feminist scholar and activist, as well as a writer, and this is what I've been for most of my life.